are the Palatine. And it is Palatine, not Palatine. There's only one N in the name, and it comes from back in Roman times where there was high-ranking officials called Palatines based on the Palatine Hill, which is in Rome. Palatine. And she is your pal. Unless you're on the opposite side of the table from her and she's approaching you at high speed. There have been a couple of changes from the Index version to the Codex version. This is the Index version, and this is the Codex version. Did you spot the changes? You can go back if you really want to make a game of it. But she's gained an extra wound and lost the ability to scout. This is mildly annoying for Dominions. And she still has the same incredible ability that makes her the Smash Palatine we all know. But her ability is confusing. It's the same as in the Index, but whether you're a new player or an experienced player, you can still get it wrong. You cause a mortal wound for every successful wound if you discard a miracle dice. Games Workshop's terminology fails us here. Reducing the wounds characteristic of one of your opponent's models, which I'm going to call health points for the moment so it's not confusing. Reducing health points by causing 2 damage with your sword doesn't cause an additional 2 mortal wounds. That isn't what is meant by successfully wounding. A successful wound is when you roll the wound dice in the roll wound dice step and roll the required number to wound the enemy. So it's the dice roll after the hit roll before the save roll. That is the wound roll that needs to be successful. This also works if you roll a 6 on the hit roll and successfully wounded because of the lethal hits ability. So with 4 attacks, if 3 of them hit and 2 of them wounded, even if your opponent saves both of them, you score 2 mortal wounds against them because you had 2 successful wounds. It doesn't matter how much damage the sword is doing, doesn't matter about enhancements to the sword that cause more damage, doesn't even matter if your enemy loses health points or not, it's all about the roll to wound. And you apply regular damage, then mortal wounds, so your opponent can't just take those 1 mortal wounds on those incredibly cheap bodyguard models who have no invulnerable save. They have to take the sword attacks, then the mortal wounds get applied to like characters, whoever's left. Mortal wounds come after regular damage. And since you cause 1 mortal wound per successful wound roll, the number of mortal wounds you can cause isn't going to be higher than the number of attacks you have. Unless you have sustained hits, but I hope that has cleared up how the ability works. That alone is great, and it means you can get rid of low miracle dice and spend them on her. It also means there is value in taking multiple Palatines just for that. It's not limited to 1 character model with this ability per turn can do this. Every Palatine in your army can use this ability at the same time. It's just going to cost you a miracle dice per Palatine. But there's benefits to having just 1 Palatine because you know that's the really good one because they can have enhancements. Every detachment, even the shooting focus Bringers of Flame detachment, has an enhancement to make her better. You remember the Blade of St. Eleanor from the Index? Well, the Blade of St. Eleanor that's called the Blade of St. Eleanor is in the Army of Faith now, not the Hallowed Martyrs, and it does something different. It improves the strength and armor penetration of your attacks by 1, and it gives you precision. The benefit of this is you can charge straight at an enemy unit, you can kill the character that's in the unit, and any mortal wounds you cause from your ability are also applied to that character. There are so many armies that have characters that make their units so much better. The Sisters of Battle are a good example. If you can kill the enemy characters, they become so much worse. And you know, you score Assassinate and things like that. The extra benefit of the Blade of St. Eleanor is it recycles. As long as you destroy at least 1 enemy model, you gain a miracle dice. So that miracle dice you just threw away on your Palatine to activate the ability, you can get a new one, perhaps a better one. So it may be worth allocating 1 attack to a bodyguard model just so you are sure that you have killed 1 enemy model. Then you'll get your miracle dice, and then all of the rest of the attacks, they can go on the character. Attacks are applied 1 at a time, so you can do it this way. You don't have to say, okay, I'm assigning all of them to 1 character or all of them to a bodyguard. And in the Army of Faith, you can also use the stratagem Divine Guidance. That gives you an extra armor penetration. AP -4 is very nice. If you've ever fired a melter weapon, you know how good that is as armor penetration. And the extra bonus is, if you destroy at least 1 enemy model, you get another miracle dice. That's on top of the one you're already getting for the Blade of St. Eleanor. And if the strength 5 that the Palatine is with the enhancement, or a regular Palatine without an enhancement is strength 4, if that isn't enough, if you think, the enemy's going to be really difficult to wound with that, Faith and Fury is a stratagem to give you Lance. So as long as you charge, you want to charge with the Palatine, you get +1 to wound. The easier it is to wound your enemies, the more mortal wounds you cause from Rapturous Blows. And hey, once again, if you kill at least one enemy model, you gain a miracle dice. I do like this detachment. The Blade of St. Eleanor that you remember from the Index is still in the Hallowed Martyrs detachment, it's just called Through Suffering Strength. You get an extra attack, you get an extra strength, you get an extra damage on your sword. We like the extra attack because that means more potential mortal wounds. We like damage 3 because we can take out big enemies. And this can include tanks. Remember, you have lethal hits, so you can wound big enemy monsters and vehicles. Oh, that's a Carnifex? Nope. Bye-bye Carnifex. This is a monster slaying character, because anything big is going to hate the lethal hits and they hate mortal wounds. And when you get to strength 5, that means that you're wounding Space Marine traitor equivalents on a 3+. And if your Palatine is injured, then you get 2 extra attacks, 2 extra strength, and 2 extra damage. 4 damage is in the equivalent realm of, you can knock over a Paragon Warsuit by yourself with a single attack. Now, you're unlikely to lose wounds on the model if you're in a bodyguard unit, and you should have a bodyguard unit, but if you take injuries from precision, that'll work. If you have a plasma pistol, and you overcharge your plasma pistol and you take the hazardous test and fail the hazardous test and take 3 wounds, there you go. Now you're running around on 1 wound and you get to have the benefit of extra strength, attacks and damage. The Martyred Lady characters like plasma pistols for overcharging and hurting themselves. It's a weird trick, but it works. So that's still there from the Index, and it's still a great way to do damage. The Bringers of the Flame detachment has an enhancement called Righteous Rage. It's a bit miracle dice intensive, but it can work really well. So the first thing to do is remember to discard a miracle dice to activate the Palatine's Rapturous Blows. Then you can discard up to 3 other miracle dice. Each time you discard a miracle dice, you get an extra attack and an extra strength. This doesn't include the miracle dice you discarded to do Rapturous Blows. So you can go up to 7 attacks, which means you can cause up to 7 mortal wounds. And when you're upping the strength, I would up it to the point where you're wounding on a 3+, because the more likely you are to wound, the more likely you are to cause mortal wounds, because it's a successful wound roll. Usually strength 5 or strength 6 should be enough. I find I often have quite a few miracle dice, even in this detachment which isn't about regenerating miracle dice, and especially in the later game, you will have a pile of miracle dice where you can just go, yep, I'm shoving 4 miracle dice into this lady, more miracle dice for the fires, add to the furnace, make the fire go warmer, make the enemies die. It's bringing the flame, but in a different way. There is no bonus swords or equivalent in the Penitent host to make your Palatine better, but you can give her Catechism of Divine Penitence. This means she gets the Penitent keyword, so all of the detachment abilities now apply to her. So she gets the detachment rule to get 3 extra movement, or an extra strength and attack. Or she can die and fight on a 2+. This will only apply to her as a model, not to any bodyguard unit she's joined. Unless that bodyguard unit she joined is a Repentia squad. This is the only way to get any character to join a Repentia squad. And as a Penitent unit, you can use Passion of the Penitent, and then her lethal hits will activate on a 5+ instead of a 6+. That'll work for her as long as she's leading a unit, and it will also work for the Repentia she's joined. So the Repentia's sustained hits, and also now lethal hits, will be activating on a 5+. This is the really good combo. This is why Repentia costs so many points. As long as you can get the Repentia safely to the fight, this is the thing that makes the disappearing act happen. Oh look, there's an enemy Chaos Knight. I see no enemy Chaos Knight because I do lethal hits and sustained hits on a 5+, and hey, that Palatine is also causing a bunch of mortal wounds. Sadly, the rerolls in the Repentia squad are only for sister Repentia models, not for every model in the unit. But it means the Repentia can be re-rolling those 1s, 2s, 3s and 4s to try and get the 5s and 6s to cause sustained hits and lethal hits. Definitely worth it for one command point, definitely a great enhancement to have the Palatine leading them. But that's not the only unit that the Palatine can lead, and in the other detachments that isn't a unit the Palatine can lead at all. You can join regular Battle Sisters. That's not bad. Bolt guns that get lethal hits are going to be wounding any enemy. The Sister Squad wants to be moving forward with the Palatine because the Sisters have Defenders of the Faith. That gives you sticky objectives. So you start on an objective, it's now your objective, you move forward towards the enemy where the Palatine is desperate to be, and that objective remains under your control. And the other great thing about the Battle Sister Squad is they can double up on some characters, and this is the only unit that can double up on characters. It tells you on the character model which units it can double up in, and which characters it can go with. So as well as the Palatine, you can also have an Imagifier, a Dialogus, a Hospitaller, or a Dog Martyr in the same squad. Having a Dog Martyr is useful because then you've got two characters that love to smash things. Having an Imagifier or a Hospitaller in the unit will also give you the bonus to your Palatine, so you can have a 2+ save if there's an Imagifier, or have a 5+ feel no pain if there's a Hospitaller. Whatever it is that keeps your character alive from precision attacks, so that you can get into combat and get to murdering. But the best character to pair with the Palatine in a Battle Sister Squad is probably the Dialogus, because you can do some shenanigans then, and it makes the Battle Sisters one of your great frontline damage dealers against enemy tanks and monsters and such. You don't even need Bringers of Flame for extra strength, you just take 1 Miracle Dice and 1 Melter Weapon. Because the Dialogus turns the Miracle Dice into a 6, you now have a hit roll of a 6, and with the Palatine's lethal hits that affects the unit, and hey, there's a -4 AP shot, which is probably getting through most saves, and from the Miracle Dice alone, you're now going straight to rolling damage. And Melter Weapons get +2 damage when you're in half range. That's a good combo, that's a good place for a Palatine. The Dominions have become a less attractive unit for her to join now that the Palatine doesn't have Scout, and when you have Flamers in the squad, they're not getting any benefit from her lethal hits, because the torrent weapons don't roll a hit roll, so they can never get the lethal hit bonus. You count as successfully hitting, not critically hitting. But we have a brand new entry! If you want more Melter Weapons to do lethal hits, yes, the Dominions can have 4 Melter Guns, or if you want bigger guns, we have an addition. The Palatine can now join Retributor squads, and have their multi-melters or heavy bolters gain lethal hits. The problem is, you're probably going to have the Retributors a bit further back, or jumping out of a Rhino or Immolator to do one shot and then probably die. They're not going to be rushing face first into the enemy, and that's what the Palatine wants to do. But if the enemy charges your Retributors, then the Palatine is a surprising murder machine now that they've made that mistake. The Retributors will still probably die, because we have no way of fighting first. Celestian Sacrosancts are the combat unit you want with the Palatine. Well, one of the combat units you can have with the Palatine. They're a very tough bodyguard, and as long as they have a character in the unit, all enemies are at -1 to wound that unit. Doesn't matter if they're targeting the Celestian Sacrosancts, doesn't matter if they have precision weapons that attack the Palatine, they're -1 to wound. You're going to want your Celestian Sacrosancts to be armed with the Anointed Halberds. They have sustained hits 1. If you have the Hallowed Maces, they already have lethal hits, and the Palatine giving them lethal hits doesn't give them double lethal hits or anything, it's a wasted ability. So you're going to want the Anointed Halberds and the Spear of the Faithful on the Superior. This once again is giving you sustained hits and lethal hits. The sustained hits is only on the Halberds because it's tied to the Halberd themselves, so the Palatine doesn't get sustained hits. But this is a unit that wants to get into combat, the Palatine wants to get into combat. It's a great pairing if you want to go a bit more endurance and you're not putting her in a Battle Sister squad with like a Hospitaller or a Magifier. But staying alive isn't necessarily the Battle Sister's forte, as you know when one of the detachments is called the Hallowed Martyrs. But Celestian Sacrosancts are in an awkward place. If you like the Bringers of the Flame detachment, there's nothing really for them there because they're a combat unit in a shooting detachment. If you want the Penitent host, yeah, that's a combat detachment, but that's all about the Penitent units. Sacrosancts are not Penitent units. The Army of Faith will give them much needed armor penetration for a stratagem, or bonuses to wound for a stratagem, but the Hallowed Martyrs may be the best place for them. If there's a squad of 10 and you lose just one of them, Now the rest of your sisters in that squad are hitting on a 2+, and if you lose even more and go below half strength, so that would be losing 6 sisters, because remember that's a squad of 11 with the Palatine joining them, then you're also getting +1 to wound, and there's Righteous Vengeance as a stratagem to reroll all hit rolls and all wound rolls. So the Celestian Sacrosancts are an option. I prefer Battle Sisters or having the Palatine with the Novitiates. It's a much flimsier bodyguard, as they only have a 4+ save rather than a 3+ save with modifiers and such, but it focuses on damage, and the Adepta Sororitas can definitely put out some damage in this codex. The Novitiates would lose their infiltrate ability because every model in the unit has to have infiltrate in order to infiltrate, much like everyone has to scout to be able to scout, but the Novitiates give the Palatine 2 really cool abilities. Number 1 is the Sacred Banner, meaning you can reroll advance rolls and reroll charge rolls. Having played quite a few Genestealer cult battles, I wouldn't risk coming from reserves and trying to get a 9-inch charge, even if you're using a miracle dice to make sure one of those dice is a really cool dice. You could get out of a Rhino, that protects you with your flimsy armor save, and then you can move and charge the enemy and you get a reroll on that charge. It gets the Palatine into combat. The second really cool thing the Novitiates give her is rerolling hit rolls of 1. It's rerolling all hit rolls if you're attacking an enemy on an objective, but just rerolling hit rolls of 1 means that her hitting on a 2+ now becomes, yes, all of the attacks hit. Being able to reroll all of the hit rolls means if you wanted, you could try and fish for those 6s, which are lethal hits, which you know are going to be doing mortal wounds because they're automatically wounding the enemy, and you know, doing more damage from your sword. The Sister Novitiates, in turn, get lethal hits from the Palatine. I very much recommend having the close combat weapons on the Novitiate squad, because the Palatine's going into combat, the Novitiates may as well also be equipped for combat. Flamers are okay, you could have 2 Flamers, that's a good option. It's a pairing that works really well together, though I know that at the moment a lot of people just like having 3 squads of Novitiates in the mid-board, holding the central objectives like from turn 1, generating miracle dice, and being a buffer that the enemy has to hit, that the Palatine can then countercharge. But that should cover all of the ways to run the Palatine. Let me know who you add your Palatine to in the comments because I'm curious. I'm a Battle Sister appreciator, I like Novitiates. Now that we don't have Scout, I'm less keen on Dominions, but all of them are very valid. That's one of the best things about the Codex. It works in so many different ways. So here's more information on the units in the Codex and which ones I suggest taking in your Adepta Sororitas army. My faithful darlings and viewers, have a great day of 40k.